Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining our discussion today about marketing and enrollment for higher education for this school year. I guess to kick it off, what a year and a half. I mean, I think that's the understatement of the millennium. In higher education, things going on have impacted students, faculty, staff, and in this case, marketing and enrollment functions, which is what we're here to talk about today. If you have questions, pop them in the Q&A or the chat. I'll moderate and field those for Eddie and Claire. I'm really excited. I know there are a lot of questions on everyone's mind about what's going on campus, off campus, in marketing. What do students want? How do we communicate to them? And we have two amazing guests to talk about that. Let me introduce them now. There's Claire Foster, Executive Vice President of Enrollment at Regent University. Hi, Claire.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. And Eddie Francis, Director of Communications and Marketing at Dillard University. Hi, Eddie.
Hey, John. Thanks a lot for having me. It's really cool to be here.
Very glad you're here. I'm just going to go dive in and start asking questions. Eddie, I'll start with you. Tell us about Dillard University, what makes it special, and your role there and what you're focusing on right now.
Dillard is a historically Black university, so it's part of a group of HBCUs around the country. We are actually the first HBCU in the state of Louisiana. Our roots go back to an old university called Straight University, which opened in 1869. Straight produced Louisiana's first and only Black governor, PBS Pinchback. But then also there was a union with another institution called New Orleans University. And New Orleans University produced one of the nation's first Black PhDs, a guy by the name of Reverend John Bowen. And so when those two institutions merged and became Dillard, there's this very interesting piece of history that when you take a look at the merger, the Alumni Association was actually founded by alumni from Straight and New Orleans University before the doors of Dillard even opened. So they knew what they wanted to do. They knew they wanted to maintain a legacy. And so Dillard has been an integral part of the higher education landscape because of our location in New Orleans, because at the time that these institutions came together, you had a lot of free people of color who were formerly enslaved, and they needed a place to learn. And so those institutions served that purpose. And so this legacy actually continued of producing people who helped grow the Black middle class, not just in the South, but throughout the United States. And so Dillard is a very proud institution. We very proudly have produced the Pulitzer Prize winner in poetry in Jericho Brown. We produced the nation's first Black Ivy League president in Dr. Ruth Simmons, and a lot of other folks of whom we are very, very proud.
Congratulations, and also have been recognized for having a gorgeous campus, am I right?
Yes. Cosmopolitan last year recognized us as one of the 50 most beautiful campuses in the country.
That's great. Well, thanks again for being here. Claire, I'll ask the same thing of you. Tell us about Regent University, what makes it special, and your role there.
Yeah, thank you. Regent University is America's premier Christian university. We're located in Virginia Beach, Virginia. We have over 11,000 students studying on campus in Virginia Beach and online around the world. We're one of the fastest growing universities in the nation right now. We've doubled our enrollment headcount over the last 6 years, and we're not tapping the brakes. We're going to continue to grow. Last year, study.com ranked Regent as the #1 accredited online college in the United States. A study by Your Local Security just ranked Regent's campus the #1 safest college campus in Virginia. And US News and World Report has ranked Regent for 9 years in a row as the #1 online bachelor's degree in the state of Virginia. So we're very thankful for that. Very excited to be a part of this discussion today.
Well, congratulations on all of those things, Claire. And for those of you who attended last year's discussion that we had on marketing and enrollment, you may recognize Claire. she's back again. And Claire, I'll ask you a follow-up question, which is, how would you compare last year to this year? What are some of the biggest differences that you see?
Yeah, I think there's probably more similarities than differences at this point, John, because the COVID-19 pandemic has been a little bit longer than maybe we had anticipated initially. I think at the outset, in March of 2020, a lot of us were thinking that, okay, let's go home for 2 weeks to flatten the curve and that kind of thing. Obviously, here we are, nearly a year and a half later and still remote working and still a lot of restrictions in place and safeguards. So I think we've had to be adaptive and agile and respond to a changing environment. We're not out of the woods yet, and so we need to continue and think of ways to be flexible and to serve our students well.
I hear that. All right, let's get into some tactical questions. I guess I'll start with what's changed for students. And Eddie, I'll ask you first. What new requests are you seeing from students as far as programming, classes, maybe types of degrees or classes, but also how they're taught, whether it's online, in person, or a mix?
Our students resoundingly have let us know that they would much rather be taught in person. And they have definitely let us know that they like being on campus. They enjoy being on campus. One of the things about Dillard is that there's this tremendous sense of connection among the students. And there's a tremendous sense of connection among the students when it comes to not only faculty, but leadership as well. And so they enjoy being able to sit face to face with a professor. They enjoy being able to walk up to a vice president and just being able to ask a question about something that's going on at the university. So with that, we've had to kind of break their hearts and let them know that we can't stop the online part of this education process, obviously because of the pandemic, but also because for traditional universities that are traditional brick and mortar, there has been this time of reckoning and realizing that online learning is not a stranger to the higher education landscape, not by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're a traditional brick and mortar, you can't get away from it now. It is something that streamlines the learning process, but then also it tightens the communication process a lot of times. So our students are having to deal with the fact that we're going to do hybrid. It is going to happen. As far as what they're asking for, one of the things I would say that they're really asking for is, it's interesting. They're asking for simplicity in how we communicate with them, but they also want us to be transparent. I think that time away from campus when everybody had to leave right away last March and they had to go to their corners of the country. The students certainly missed it, but then they also really missed out on the way they communicated with their professors and with leaders. And so when we talked to them, and our president, Walter Kimbrough, did a really good job in doing a series of student focus groups during last summer, the summer of 20, to get an idea of what it is that we needed to do for them. And what they told us was, number one, be transparent. I mean, even if the news is going to break our hearts, just tell us what's going on. But the other thing was, and this was really funny to me, is they said, listen, we love the emails. Well, no, we don't. But the emails that are coming, don't spend a paragraph trying to fluff us up and let us down easy about stuff. Just give it to us simple, straight, and quick. And so we had to learn to be simple, and we had to learn to be more transparent when it came to communicating with students. But like I said, as much as they would love for everything to be 100% brick and mortar, we did have to kind of break their hearts and say, hey, listen, we're not turning back now. If you're not going to have an online class, it's going to most likely be hybrid.
Thanks, Eddie. Claire, how does this compare to what you're hearing from students? And I notice you're in the office, you're on campus today, I presume. Eddie, you're on campus. What are Claire, what are you hearing from students, and also in terms of interest for hybrid, online, in person?
Yeah, well, I will echo what Eddie said because there is a ton of pent-up demand for on-campus programs, especially this, high school graduate, traditional aged undergraduate student, that's late teens, early 20s. They want to be in person. They want that campus experience because it's about more than just the academics. They want to be with their friends. They want student life. They want athletics. There's a whole experience that comes with those college years, and they're desperate for that. They deserve that. So yeah, it's interesting. A large percentage of our students are strictly online, but that's kind of like the adult learner audience, average age of 35, who is already in their career, and it's working professionals, and they just want the convenience of online learning. So I was just looking at this study by Google that said they studied the on-campus undergraduate students before the pandemic to gauge their interest in online learning. And then they did the same study now, 18 months into the pandemic, to measure that level of interest in online learning. So they asked a question to this on-campus undergraduate audience, would you consider taking one or more classes online or some kind of a hybrid format? Before the pandemic, 25% of those students responded and said, yeah, I'll do at least one of my classes online or hybrid. Now, that 25% in favor of online learning has tripled to more than 75% say, yeah, I'm okay with one or more of my classes being online or hybrid. So I think it's about options here. That data is showing us that even though there's a desire to be on campus as a primary modality, maybe there's a course or two that are, mixed into their other options where they'll have some kind of hybrid or online learning. So it's interesting to see the shift there.
I'm thinking back to my college days. I probably wish my early morning Monday class was online. Um,
Yeah.
so in addition to online versus in-person, hybrid, and so on, have you noticed, Claire, any differences in the type of programs or degrees that students are interested in, or is it too early to tell?
We've seen a surprising increase in kind of liberal arts and humanities and philosophy and ministry kind of concentrations. So, Mark Cuban recently said that 10 years from now, a degree in philosophy will be worth more than a degree in computer programming. Why is that? Because increasingly, technical and programming kinds of functions can be outsourced because of efficiencies in AI and how cheap it is to do AI. But on the flip side, liberal arts and philosophy and those kinds of things, teach the sort of things that you can't outsource. You can't outsource strong leadership skills. You can't outsource decision making abilities. You can't outsource, the interpersonal skills and the human touch. So I think it is going to be interesting to see how corporations distinguish themselves in an increasingly automated society with human soft skills and leadership skills. And employers are going to need, those employees who have that ability. So that's one of the things that we're seeing.
Claire, that resonates for me. I mean, probably all of us on the call who are marketing professionals would love to have more creative writing talent in the job market. Eddie, how do Claire's comments sync up with the experience you're seeing at Dillard?
There's some alignment, especially when it comes to liberal arts. We're a liberal arts university, and so that's where we make our money. And it's worth mentioning that for us, we have a strong social sciences area. Yeah, I was taking a look at some of our enrollment data, And while we don't have obviously our final numbers right now for this semester, one trend that had gone upward for us was social sciences. We saw a 9% increase from one year to the next year. And I think part of that might be in our case, uh, especially when you talk about what happened in the summer of 2020. I think we had a lot of students who decided that they saw some societal problems and they wanted to do something about it. And for Dillard, one of those strong areas for us is criminal justice. We actually do have a Center for Racial Justice right now. And we also have a thriving pre-law program, one of our co-curricular programs. And so I think that what we have is that we do have these students, especially as an HBCU, especially as an institution that serves Black students. I think we have these students who are saying, society is a problem. I want to solve this problem. I'm seeing this happen with my family. How can I get in and how can I be one of the people to help solve the problem? One of the things I would love to call out about our pre-law program is that in the class of 2021, we had 93% of the students who took the LSAT and they were, or who applied for law school, and they were accepted by law schools. And that is actually an increase from the previous year of about 160% of students who were accepted to law schools from our pre-law program. So we do have these students who are taking a look at it. Now, another area for us that is of great interest to a lot of students is nursing. From one year to the next year, we had an increase in nursing of about 29% when it came to students. I think for that, you probably look more at the market demand. While we have one institution with a nursing program that may compete with another institution for a nursing program because of the demands of the market, we all need to, it's almost like we all need to have nursing programs, and the competition is almost irrelevant to some degree. But we have seen increases in those two areas, and that's where it looks like a lot of students have had a lot of interest. And biology is actually a pretty strong program for us, for a lot of students who are looking to go into the medical field, whether they're looking to be MDs, or looking to be veterinarians, or looking to be dentists. So we have seen some increases there.
Very interesting stuff, and congratulations on the achievement of your pre-law program. We've talked a little bit so far about students. I want to shift the conversation a bit about marketing and us as marketers. And I also want to encourage anyone who's listening, if you have a question, type it in the Q&A. So my first question is about how we've had to change as marketers. I can give my own personal anecdote, which is one of the things we're most excited about in marketing is our annual in-person user and customer conference. It's where we build relationships, have really important discussions, and have fun. And we've had to figure out how to have these types of important industry conversations in new ways. This is an example of that. Claire, let me ask you, what have some of your biggest adjustments needed to be over the last year and a half?
Well, one of the biggest adjustments, of course, has been these kinds of industry discussions. And thank you for leading the way on creating a forum like this. Webinars have been a huge shift, and very popular shift because of how accessible it is for everyone to tune in and get some really great industry expertise. One of the things I've learned just over the last year and a half is, just being adaptive, responding to a rapidly shifting environment. I feel like I've gotten pulled into public policy in a way. Being on the executive committee here, we've had to wrestle with a lot of new policies that we never imagined we would have to create, but crisis communication is now my day job. And so I think communication has been really critical. And to echo something that Eddie said about student communication, tell us what we need to hear, do it in a succinct way. That's been really important, because the last thing you want to do during a crisis situation is go radio silent or be unclear about what's going on and what people need to do. People really want to hear what your perspective is. They want to know, even if maybe you haven't made a decision, let people know what you're thinking about and what are the issues at hand. What are you looking into? What are you aware of? People need to know what's happening and how the university plans to respond. So that's been really critical, providing robust, frequent, detailed communication to both internal and external audiences.
Eddie, what have your key learnings been over the last year or so?
Yeah, I think one thing that I have paid much more attention to because of what's been happening has been internal communication, and not necessarily internal communication to make sure we get this flurry of messages out and to make sure that we just keep it simple and transparent, but actually looking at it more as a PR tactic and really treating it as part of the strategy. And so the thing that we have asked ourselves has been, well, great. We know that they wanted to keep it simple. They know they wanted to be transparent, but is there such a thing as over communicating? Even when you have the students and the faculty and the staff who grumble and say, "Oh, not another newsletter." Can they look at it and say, "We didn't tell you so," or "We didn't say something to you"? So we've had to figure out the frequency with which we would produce, e-newsletters. We've had to think about stylizing how we would style the newsletters. We actually, I have someone on the team who's great with GIFs, and so she has this thing where she always seems to pick up the right GIF that's going to go into a newsletter, and so we've had to think of that. But then I think the other thing for me is that for me, and I don't know about you, Claire, but things have moved a lot faster because we have had these areas of the university where we don't like the virtual environment all that much. But wait a minute, you mean to tell me I can get the speaker who I would have had to pay about $20,000 for, and I can get this person to do a Zoom webinar for almost nothing? And so when people started to figure that part out, all of a sudden we had our centers, our co-curricular programs, they were producing Zoom webinar after Zoom webinar after Zoom webinar, which was great. It was a great problem to have because it did show that we still had life. It showed that we were producing knowledge. It showed that we were bringing people to the table from around the country. We were giving students access to people that they most likely would not have had access to. So we've had to also adjust to the speed of how everything has gone. We've had to figure out how to tighten up web content a lot of times. We've had to figure out a lot more about the user experience. We've had to figure out a lot of these issues. I wound up polling the campus at one point because you have those folks who say, well, the website is not a whole lot to look at. So at one point I wound up polling the campus and asking them, okay, what do you want? Do you want the website to be pretty or do you want the information to be available? Which one is more important? And resoundingly, people said, okay, yeah, I would like a good looking website, but just make sure the information is there when I log on, and I'll spend my 5 seconds there and move on to the next page and then, find what I need to find. So those are some of the things that I really had to make some adjustments and pull my team together and ask them, okay, how do we handle this? How do we handle that? What do we do here? What do we do there?
Thanks, Eddie. I want to talk a little bit about media mix and the types of ways that we communicate or market to prospective students. I was talking to someone earlier today and we were reminiscing a bit about our early marketing careers where we might pay for a billboard and try to estimate how many people saw it driving by. I don't know if anybody in the audience can relate to that marketing experience, but just in terms of what you've done over the last year or 2 years, Claire, that's different with marketing mix, more paid search, less paid search, more offline, less offline. How have you thought about really connecting with prospective students?
Well, First of all, John, yes, I can relate to your discussion about billboards because I feel like I cut my teeth learning traditional media and direct mail and some of those things that we might think are antiquated now, but still an important part of the process. So when I think about media mix, I realize how important it is to constantly monitor your media mix to determine what's working and what's not working. Digital marketing has given us this ability to track exactly which ad produces a lead, and from that, an application, a registration, a student, a graduate, and so on down the funnel. So, by monitoring that activity, as marketers, we can align the investment and the budgets with the channels that are producing the most students. So, that's great, right? I think, though, it's introduced this challenge. There's a temptation to only invest dollars in those bottom of the funnel activities or those last click attribution sources, especially in digital, paid search and SEO and those kinds of things give us a lot of students. Why? Because it's at the bottom of the funnel and they're high intent students. So there's this temptation to spend all the dollars there. However, I think marketers need to understand the value of upper funnel awareness activities like billboards, like TV, like radio. What are the things that are ultimately driving people into the funnel and creating interest so that they will go to your website and request information and so on? It's a good question.
Thanks. The marketing tab they changed for you and your team recently.
Yeah, so one of the things I would preface this one by saying is that I'm actually going into my second year at Dillard, so I'm still fresh in. And when I came in, we had just come off our 150th anniversary celebration, and New Orleans is a very traditional market, and so that billboard story, John, is very familiar. I have to tell this story because I have to get all the marketers to laugh. But I was at one institution and someone came to me really frustrated one day and they said, listen, I don't think you're really doing a good job. And I said, well, what's going on? We need billboards around this city. And I said, okay, what do you want to say? Come to this school. That's what it needs to say. And I said, I never would have thought of that, man. That's a good idea. And so um and so New Orleans, though, is that kind of city where people have a lot of people have old souls and they're very traditional. So that has been a challenge for us as a New Orleans based institution, is figuring out how to break out of a lot of that. So one of the things that, and I tell that story because one of the questions I constantly ask folks when I got to Dillard was, what language really describes our value in the marketplace? What do you say about us? What is it that we, and of course, a lot of people came up some baseline answers that you would expect people at a small institution. We have about 1,200 students. So family came up a lot, community came up a lot. And so what we had to do is we had to figure out how to drill down. So for me, when it comes to the marketing mix, I definitely am looking forward to investing in digital. We started in that direction. But for me in the marketing mix, my biggest thing has been, what are we going to say? We need to be able to say something. What exactly is the visual identity? Sometimes I drive my team crazy because I'll look at a picture and I'll ask them, what's this picture saying? What exactly is this thing saying? Is this the right picture for this moment? Is this the right picture for this media? Should this picture go into a digital ad or should it go into a traditional newspaper ad? And so that is really where a lot of my concentration has been, because obviously, as we all know, we only have a couple of seconds with folks when they decide to look at our pieces. And so in those couple of seconds, my trying to figure out what it is that we're going to say, what is the language going to look like? What is the visual identity going to look like? Is it really telling Dillard's story? And and the other thing is it the best investment for us? There are folks who have said, hey, you need to, if you're going to do digital ads, go into this market because this is where you tend to get a whole lot of students. But there's another area that says, no, we need to go into that market because that's where we want more students. And so having that debate has also been a part of it. So I think for me, the way our marketing mix has changed has been figuring out how to be more intentional when it comes to our messaging, and then also being more intentional when we decide where we are going to do placement.
Really thoughtful comments. I want to ask a question that came in via the chat, via the Q&A, and it's about tuitions. And I think it's a good question, which is for programs that have gone fully online or hybrid, have you considered or implemented any tuition changes? And I'll ask Claire that question first.
We have a deeply discounted tuition rate. We're one of the most affordable private universities in the country, actually. And so our online programs already have a really deep tuition discount. But thinking about on-campus programs, you know, that's a really interesting thing across the nation. There were many universities that issued, you know, some refunds for the sources that weren't being used during the pandemic. So in March, everybody had to move out of the dorms, and you know, we sent people home and things like that. And so we did issue refunds for student activities fees, for housing fees at a prorated rate to kind of reimburse those students for the services that obviously they weren't going to be able to use because they weren't on campus. From a tuition standpoint, we did a really good job of transitioning all of our on-campus programming and coursework and classes and instruction into an online modality, but still having a synchronous component to it, you know, Zoom sessions like this, and where the people could collaborate and have these conversations. And so our faculty actually had to do a lot more to make that happen at the height of the pandemic. And thankfully, we were able to reopen campus, you know, that following August with a lot of health and safety precautions in place. And so we weren't in a place where we had to adjust tuition for the last academic year. But it's a great question.
Eddie, how have your experiences aligned with Claire's?
Yeah, so one of the things about us is that among our peer group of institutions, a group of HBCUs that are private, faith-based, and pretty much we attract the same types of students. We are actually among the lowest, if not the lowest, as far as those institutions are concerned when it comes to tuition. So we already were in a spot where among our peer group, we were keeping it as low as we possibly could. The thing that I would ask people to really, really consider in this discussion about discounting tuition or refunding funds, and certainly like Claire, you know, there were resources that we weren't using and we wound up doing refunds for those resources. But one of the things that I would ask people to think about, and you know, this is us doing any and everything we can to provide the product that's needed so that students can learn and students can get a degree and they can go out and start their careers. A lot of people don't realize the huge investment that colleges and universities had to make in technology to get through the pandemic. I mean, having to buy all of these licenses, having to increase server space, and having to do all that. Those were huge expenses for everyone. And being able to sync that, and in some cases of some institutions, sinking funds that they barely even had in the first place into those types of materials. You know, that is something when people ask, well, what am I getting out of this? This is what you got out of it. You got the enhanced technology in a lot of cases. But then also, you know, as Claire pointed out, the health and safety materials on campus. You know, those sneeze shields. I mean, yeah, a lot of people, you know, at Dillard, we have folks who were making those things from scratch, but we still had to go buy the raw materials in order to have students back on campus. In order for students to feel safe on campus, we still had to go buy all of these different materials. And so I think folks really need to think about what the expenses were, what the strain was on so many budgets, and how in some cases, you know, even the tuition at the level it was probably for some institutions barely even covered those materials. And so, and I think that's a big thing. And the other thing, you know, I used to be a job recruiter, and one thing I heard a lot of is, well, you know, I got this degree, and so, you know, I need a huge discount because it was online. And as a job recruiter, I would challenge people by asking this question: if I offer you a job, you got your job online, do you want me to cut your salary in half because it was online? I think not. You know, you want me to pay you the full freight of whatever that job position is worth. And you know what? People are going to do it. And as a recruiter, I didn't call whenever I called someone and asked them about their education history, I didn't say, hey, where'd you graduate from? Okay, was it online or not? Okay, all right. I mean, I didn't do that. For a job recruiter, all I needed to know was if the answer was yes or no, do you have a degree? And boom, we moved from there, and you moved on in the job process, and you got that job regardless of where you got the degree and how you got the degree.
Every once in a while, a question comes in the Q&A that I'm jealous of because I wish I had thought of it myself. This is a great question. Really gets to the heart of marketing, I think. And that is, what's been the best way to get in contact with a prospective student once they've shown interest? Chat, phone, scheduled call. I mean, there's a question of scale here. There's a question of nurturing. There's a question of how to invest once someone has responded in some way to our marketing messages. Claire, Eddie, any thoughts on this question?
It's a really good question. And I was actually just looking at a report yesterday on contact preference. And this was a national study that was looking at Gen Z all the way down to baby boomers. And it grouped people, you know, Gen X and millennials and Gen Z, boomers, and it showed, you know, this funnel of contact preference for phone contact versus SMS, text messaging, WhatsApp, or you know those other kind of text-based communications. So what we're seeing is if you look at the you know baby boomer audience up to Gen Z, there's this decrease in interest for being contacted by the phone. You know, the baby boomer generation still wants that phone contact, a warm conversation, speak with someone about their concerns. And as you go up to Gen Z, it's like a 20% of Gen Z students really want that phone conversation. So there's an inverted funnel on the other side, right? Baby boomers are not interested in text messaging or the application kinds of alerts. But when you get up to Gen Z, there's this increase in interest to be contacted that way. So think about the market that you're reaching, think about the consumer as an individual, and keep in mind that Gen Z especially is showing more preference to be contacted by SMS or text message than to be contacted by phone. You need to think about that with contact center operations.
Yeah, and in our experience, it actually all pretty much fits with the research that Claire saw, and so for a lot of our students, I really wish I could look at what our specific data would be on how our students like to be contacted. But you know, anecdotally though, I will say that having spoken to students about this and just getting some rough thoughts from them, they don't necessarily mind the phone call. They don't necessarily mind the text messages. There's some cases where people say, "Hey, personalizing the messages is definitely the way you want to go." It was interesting. One webinar I was listening to, there was someone who said, "You know, students don't really mind being stalked," and I'm sitting there going, "You don't know our students. I mean, they they will let you have it if they feel like they're being tracked a little too much." And so, but I do think some of the more traditional forms may be the way a lot of our students tend to go.
Thanks for that. Really interesting answers, and on how students are interested in being contacted. You know, when I asked the question before about tuition changes both Regent and Dillard clearly have an advantage with respect to affordability. In terms of in terms of other ways to distinguish your universities versus the competition, what are some other ways that you do that? Maybe ways that might be unique to this year, if there is one. For example, having a special experience on campus, or maybe everything's available online if things go haywire again with COVID. What are other ways that you all are distinguishing yourselves from other schools?
So at Regent, one of the things that we've done that I don't think anyone else has done, we created a Center for Student Happiness. And the goal of that center is to provide one-on-one life coaching, counseling, tutoring, kind of helping the student, not just from an academic standpoint, but for their needs as an individual, mind, body, and spirit, right? We want to educate the whole person and not just the mind. So that's one thing that we've done that's been really successful. Um, I was part of a panel recently with JP Morgan and Moody's where they were looking at different things that distinguished schools as a leader in their field. And this is all about value proposition. It's all about the distinction that sets you apart from any other university in the world. And two of the schools that were part of the study was Savannah College of Art and Design and Massachusetts College of Pharmacy. And the reason that those two schools were put into this case study was because they have found a way to really emphasize their niche. Massachusetts College of Pharmacy is right in downtown Boston in the Longwood area. So, like Harvard Medical School is right across the street, and they are so well known that it is the school to go to for pharmacists. Savannah College of Art and Design, right? SCAD is hugely popular for creatives and photographers, videographers, graphic design. They've just distinguished themselves in that market. So I would say that, outside from just the regional poll, because there is a proximity principle at play, when there's students in like a 200-mile radius around your campus, they'll feel comfortable going to your school because there's that local affinity for your school. But beyond that, if you're going to tap into regional and national and global markets, you really need to distinguish yourself in a niche. Focus on what you're good at and make that the thing that you do very well and very successfully.
Yeah, and I think for us as an HBCU, a lot of our students want to know where we stand on issues. They are very focused on that. And so one thing, there are two entities within Dillard that I think have really spoken to where we stand on social issues, and also our pride as an African American community. One's the Center for Racial Justice, and our Center for Racial Justice actually just last week or a couple of weeks ago, they had a summer program called Ride Revived, where young leaders from around the city of New Orleans and other areas were invited to come to campus, and they were invited to learn about voter rights, voter suppression, and they were actually trained on how to approach those issues. And what this institute is planning to do is they are planning to have another version of a freedom ride. And they want to go around the country and they want to empower people about voting rights. And the other thing is that, the Center for Racial Justice is one of those areas when I talked about areas that decided to ratchet up their online presence and virtual panel discussions. They took full advantage of that opportunity and did some fantastic programming over the last academic year, even one or two during the summer and coming into this academic year. But the other area where we really, really decided to set ourselves apart was leveraging the knowledge that we have in our Minority Health and Health Disparities Research Center. In early March, one of our researchers, a woman by the name of Dr. Amy Lesson, Dr. Lesson was probably the first person to call out how COVID would expose health disparities in the African American community. And it was interesting because around the time that she did her editorial about it, and it was an editorial that just went all over the place, but right before she did her editorial, I distinctly remember people being on social media, and there was a lot of misinformation concerning COVID and African Americans, and it was some really bad stuff. She comes out a little later and says, hey, by the way, there are these serious health disparities. And so from there, she did more research about it. Another one of our researchers, Dr. Peter Foss, did some research on his end about the health disparities. And so those two areas really, really showed a lot of folks where we stand as an institution. They show that we really stand on being able to keep track of what the issues are when it comes to policies that affect African Americans. But then also it really showed folks where we stand as far as monitoring what's happening with the health of African Americans. And by the way, along with the work of the Minority Health and Health Disparities Research Center, our College of Nursing jumped in and worked with them as well, which really gave them so much more influence when it came down to calling these issues out. So I think a lot of students, a lot of parents, definitely our alumni, when they saw that we decided to make statements, when they saw that we decided to dig into these issues, I think that really helped them realize that this university with which they are associated holds a lot of value and definitely intends to keep being a voice in those areas.
Well, one of the great things about being a marketer is when you can market something that's really special. And Claire and Eddie, it's really clear there are really special things going on campus for students and for our society. And so that's really cool to market a brand that's doing awesome things. Let's see, we're just about out of time, and so I think I want to ask just one more question, and that is like a look ahead question. And when you look ahead to the next year, what's something that you feel like you want to focus on more? I can say for myself, I'm really keen to do always better on the measurement and attribution side, and I'm trying to connect my upper funnel tactics to new customers that come to Centerfield. Claire, Eddie, how do you respond to that question? What's something you really want to focus on over the next year as a marketer?
As a marketer, I think I want to continue to think about improving access to education in whatever format that looks like. Obviously, we're seeing a lot of demand for the on-campus programming and the student life and those kinds of things. But at the same time, the pandemic, I think, shined a light on online education and the flexibility, the convenience, the affordability of that format. And so to enhance access and improve access across the board in whatever kind of format that looks like. You know, there's going to be some hybrid things that we're going to try this year that we've never tried before. You know, we're going to continue to promote online programs and continue to emphasize the on-campus option. You know, I think because of declining birth rates over the next 10 years, we're going to see sort of an enrollment cliff for on-campus programs simply based on the shrinking market for that. But again, it's an opportunity to prove value proposition and to set your university apart from any other competitor.
Yeah, this answer might frustrate a whole lot of people. And it's gonna sound so cliche, but you know, keeping history alive, I think in marketing, I think is very important, especially for us as an HBCU. There's this comment that I've been hearing a lot lately. I've been seeing it on Twitter. And there are folks, you know, and I love Twitter, by the way, so I'm always on Twitter, but there are these folks who are saying, yeah, I'm really tired of hearing about the history of HBCUs and this history. But then, you know, I'll walk across campus one day and I was actually talking to a student and I mentioned that we have this alumna who was the first Black commissioner and the first Black chair of the Federal Elections Commission. And the student says, I didn't know that. Well, nobody said anything about that. And I said, of course we did. We did a story about it. We put it on Twitter. We put it on social media. We actually even one day emailed everybody on campus. We put it in a newsletter that we wanted everybody to share the story, and about 20 of you did it. And so, you know, it was very frustrating because this happened in January of 2021. It didn't happen in January of 1951. It didn't happen in 1941. It happened in 2021. And so, and one of the things that I tell people is this, you know, if you present history as something that is ho hum, yeah, whatever, of course, no one is going to want to hear it because you don't even want to talk about it. But if you give it context, if you keep it in context and you put it in its proper place when it comes to talking about the value of the product that you offer to folks, then that actually it sticks a lot more. And so when we talk about this, I think as a marketer, one of the things that I really want to do to make sure that I'm always promoting the value of the product that we have to offer is that the product has always been strong. If you look at the history and if you want to be the next one to make history. And so, so yeah, so for me, just keeping history alive, as cliche as it sounds, keeping history alive is a big focus of mine going into this next year.
Well, you also, Eddie, when you were giving that answer, you also mentioned kind of the concept of students being ambassadors and students being marketers themselves, sharing a tweet as an example. And so, Claire, I'll ask you a bonus question here, which is, as a marketer, how much do you think about your students being your marketing partner?
Oh, it's huge. And to be honest, today's students value the input of their peers way more than they value big budget advertising. They would much rather read a review or ask their buddy, "Hey, what did you think of this?" And they trust that response more than, the messaging that we're putting out. So we have, social media meetings where we're arming our student ambassadors with information about the university and talking points and giving them creative things that they can share and creating communities on social media where they can interact with one another because, yeah, it's influencer marketing at, at its core. So it's super important to support that.
Well, let me wrap up. We're about at the top of the hour. I'd like to thank everyone who attended today's discussion, also everyone who asked questions and said stuff in the chat. Claire, Eddie, thank you very much. This was a great discussion. Really happy to talk with you today.
Always a pleasure, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate the invitation.
Bye, everyone.